This video will focus on AWS Secure Initial Account Setup, because as you start to develop in AWS or migrate existing applications to AWS, you're going to want to make sure that you're developing in as secure an environment as possible. AWS makes it very easy to maintain a secure account by providing many account-level security options and tools that enable customers to meet their security objectives and implement the appropriate controls for their business functions. A few best practices are, first of all, to create a strategy in your AWS account to control permissions at the user level and grant the minimum set of permissions necessary, otherwise known as least privilege, to complete a job, role, or task. And once again, we've covered how to do this in other videos, but as a quick overview, the best way to control your users and maintain least privilege permissions is with users and groups. So by attaching users to groups, you're able to assign permissions based on job roles, which means you're able to give users only what they need and nothing more. Another best practice is to monitor and audit your users and regularly review privileges. We've talked about a few different ways to log activity in AWS, but we're going to cover all of them in a future video. You should also maintain least privileges at the account and billing level. So you should identify which individuals should be able to interact with AWS regarding billing, security, and operations matters, and grant authorization accordingly. You should also ensure continuous communication through AWS, even if particular individuals change roles or leave the company. For example, you should use email distribution lists and company phone numbers rather than personal email addresses or mobile phone numbers. And finally, for consistency across multiple accounts, multiple regions, or even multiple software stacks, you should use AWS CloudFormation or a similar configuration tool to automatically set up logging and monitoring features for new solutions. There are a few best practices when it comes specifically to IAM as well, and the first is create a strong root account password and enable physical multi-factor authentication on the root account. If you have or you're using root account access keys, you should also remove them and use IAM roles or user access keys instead. You should also ensure that you have a documented process for adding and removing authorized users. Ideally, it should fully integrate with your organization's existing employee directory. You should also create IAM groups that reflect organizational roles and use AWS managed policies or user managed policies to grant specific technical permissions as required. And finally, if you have an existing identity federation provider, you can use AWS's security token service to grant external identities secure access to your AWS resources without having to create IAM users. For logging and auditing, AWS provides several different tools to help customers monitor their account activities and trends. AWS recommends all customers enable a few different features. First, you should create a security email distribution list to receive security-related notifications. This will make it easier to configure and manage monitoring notifications associated with the monitoring services described below. You should also create an Amazon Simple Notification Service topic for security notifications and subscribe the security email distribution to the topic. This will make it easier to create and manage security-related alerts. There's also a service called CloudTrail. You should enable CloudTrail in all regions, which by default will capture global service events. Enable CloudTrail log file integrity validation and send logs to a central S3 bucket that your security team owns. And right off the bat, you can see a few of the things that CloudTrail has caught recently, including a few actions by Elastic Beanstalk, an autoscaling action, and even a decrypt action by the root user. You should configure CloudTrail integration with Amazon CloudWatch logs and create CloudWatch alarms for security and network-related API activity. There's also a really useful service called Amazon Config. You should absolutely enable AWS Config. You can use a couple of predefined rules to notify your security SNS topic if CloudTrail is disabled for the account, or if someone creates insecure security group rules. Getting too deep into AWS config is beyond the scope of this certification course, but if you're going to be migrating applications to the cloud or developing in AWS, AWS config should absolutely be something that's on your radar. You should also create an S3 bucket for storing monitoring data and configure the bucket policy to allow the appropriate services like CloudTrail and AWS config to store AWS log and configuration data. For multiple accounts, you should use a single bucket to consolidate this data and restrict access appropriately. Also, similar to how you designated a security distribution list and created an SNS topic for security distribution, you should do the same for billing. You should designate a billing email distribution list that will receive billing notifications and create an SNS topic for budget notifications and subscribe to the billing email distribution list to this topic. You or your administrator should also create one or more budgets in your account and configure notifications if forecasted spending exceeds your budgeted usage. And that about wraps it up for this quick video on how to secure your AWS account. So if all of that makes sense, then feel free to move on.